So glad to be here. I'm really excited to see you all here, and I'm really excited to be invited back to talk with you this evening. I always think you guys are the coolest group for a variety of reasons. Obviously, you're wicked great with little kids and all that stuff is good, but there's also the reality that you're always asking us social workers to come talk to you, to come work with you. When I was hired at PCDC, I was a social worker taking a little break from the intensity of the work to be administrator and supervise some of the programming there, and I was really welcomed because I had human service social work background. So I really appreciate how much you focus on the social emotional development of your children as much as all the other pieces that you do, and I really value that in you and really appreciate how you value that in those of us who do the work. I do want to just say to you that be careful what you ask for, because you then have been, or somebody has asked me as a social worker to stand up here and talk to you about working with families. So that you could have asked a lot of different kinds of people. So you're going to get a whole different kind of thought about this based on what I think you might want to hear about or might be helpful for you to hear about than you might have gotten from maybe someone else. And I'm really excited to hear that this is Brain Building Week, because what I'm up here to try to do tonight, my goal of this presentation is actually to help build your brains a little bit around working with families. But my first question to you is, are we really talking about working with all families? Is that what you asked me to come up here and talk to you about, working with all families? I kind of have a funny feeling, and I am a trained professional. I do overanalyze things, but I don't think you really meant the family that has their child in bed by 8, feeds them a nutritious breakfast first thing in the morning, brings them to school and always tells you if there's been some change in their home experience, keeps them home if they have a temperature over 99 degrees, communicates any changes, as I said, asks, how can I support this important learning at home, and then at the end of the year gives you an expensive gift to thank you. I don't think you're talking about those families in particular when you asked me to come up here. So really, who are we talking about when you asked a social worker to talk about working with families? I think you're talking about those parents who are challenging to you. And my guess is that there are some parents for all of you that create a challenge. So my goal for this evening, actually, is to really figure out how do I inspire you to align more closely with those parents who challenge you. Because again, I think you're really good probably at even recognizing those children who challenge you need something very special from you. I think most early educators that I've worked with, that I've supported, that I've encouraged, that I've gotten the honor of working closely with, really understand that that child that you would rather hadn't showed up that day needs something super special from you. And I'm going to suggest that actually the parents that you feel that way about also need something special from you. And that's what I'm hoping to do tonight, is to give you some suggestions about how you can build your own brain to provide something special for those parents who challenge you. So let's first talk about why is it so hard for you to work with some of those parents that challenge you. First of all, and I'm sure if anybody's ever heard me speak about anything ever before about early education, this is a real statistic. 80% of early childhood providers are what we call in the biz, conflict avoidant. So anything that comes up that doesn't actually feel that good is not necessarily something you guys are all sort of like all about going right at it, right? So how many people might say this potentially pertains to them? Oh, that's not 80%. Maybe the statistic is old. The other thing is most of you came into this field to talk to children, not to talk to adults. So I have worked with lots of early educators who actually feel like they are great when it comes to kids. Just please let somebody else talk to the grown-ups, right? Is there anybody in this room that might agree with that? Like you could talk to kids all day. So unfortunately, one of the things that we've learned when we work with children is they almost always come with parents. Almost always. I actually do a lot of consultation with therapists who also do a lot of work with children, and most of them are prepared to work with parents, but not even all of them, quite frankly. I have a clinician in my office just today who has said, I said, you know, I almost referred this kid to you, but I remembered they had parents. She's like, oh yeah, I don't do that parent thing. I'm like, right, so you're not getting that one. Some parents really are difficult, right? Some parents actually come with a real challenge. They have some sort of a learning challenge themselves, maybe mental illness, or maybe just even what's considered a very difficult personality. So temperamentally, you're actually going to have parents, if you're in this field, that are going to challenge you no matter who you are. And herein lies where we're going to start to really talk about you. Because as much as it might be fun to talk about the parents that challenge us all night long, I'm really here to talk about you and what you can do about the fact that some of these parents are going to challenge you. And that is that part of what's challenging about working with parents is that we start to assign a story to what they do, to how they behave, how they treat their children, and how they treat you, how they present themselves. We've developed a story and a judgment. And it's that story and judgment that I kind of want to do a little bit of work with tonight, in an effort, again, as a goal to help to make your job easier. It's really not that I'm so worried about those poor parents that you maybe find challenging. It's really that I'm trying to figure out, how do I help you feel better at the end of the day, even though some of the parents that show up at your door are challenging for you. Here's the news. We can only change ourselves. Any work we're going to do to be more aligned with even challenging parents is an inside job. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to talk a little bit about what do you do about the inside job that has to happen, and then taking that information, what do you do to step outside of that and present yourself in a slightly different way, even with parents who are challenging. So, going back to the fact that at this point you did, or somebody did, and maybe you'll be sorry, requested a social worker to talk to you about this. In social work, in any kind of mental health, we always have a treatment plan. So tonight, I'm going to share with you tonight's treatment plan. I don't know if any of you out there in the audience are social workers, but in a treatment plan in mental health, you always start with the client's words, and then, and in this case, the client is you, and then you put those words into a goal that makes sense to you and is like measurable, doable, something you can actually do with. So I decided what I thought your goals were for tonight and tried to imagine how you might say them. So in the client's words, there's two goals for the evening. The first being, as a pacifist, I do not want to be charged with assault and battery. I would think about it more like this. Improve empathy and reduce judgment. That's our goal, one of our goals for this evening. Our second goal, I want to make parents do what I want them to do. Your words. I'm going to suggest that we motivate parents towards indisputable targets. So those are the two things that we're working on this evening. How do we reduce some judgment and improve empathy and make sure everybody stays out of jail? And how do we motivate parents when we see that there's something that really actually does need to change, and that there's a variety of reasons that parents resist that? So I'm hopefully going to come up with some suggestions to you about how you might do that. So first we have to talk a little bit, what does it mean when we say that there is a story, that we create a story? Well, this is what's true for all of us. So here I need to back up a little bit. I'm not actually just talking to you as early educators and administrators. I'm talking to you as human beings. As human beings, we add something in. There's the facts, and there's our response to the facts, and there's something that happens in between that. So there's the facts that happen, it triggers something for us that adds a whole bunch of other stuff to it, and then we create a story, and then we respond based on the story. It's very unusual that we just see the facts, and then we respond. We actually are programmed as humans to have what's called automatic thoughts. Automatic thoughts actually are the shortcuts that help us actually make decisions a lot of the time. So, if we noticed it was raining outside and we were getting ready to get in our car and it had just been raining for a little bit, if we had to stop and process whether we should drive slower or put our windshield wipers on, that would probably be cumbersome, right? So if we have that automatic thought like, oh, it's been raining, I should put on my windshield wipers, that's a really helpful automatic thought. Unfortunately, as humans, then we have automatic thoughts about everything. And that's based in our experiences, what we thought about a situation in the past, how we feel about a situation. And that's often added in before we even start to respond. So before we move on, in your packets that I gave you, the one thing I will ask you to do is find that there's a blank piece of paper in the back. What I'm going to ask you to do is a couple of things with this piece of paper. You're not going to have to share it with anyone, but I'm going to ask you to jot down 3 or 4 or 5 sentences about a family, aka a parent, that you're finding challenging. All right, and then I'm going to ask you to do one other thing, and then you can put your pens down again. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of situations that I think happen pretty regularly that early educators find frustrating. And I'm going to ask you, you know how they used to do those tests where you would have you'd try to say your first thought? That's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to just jot down your first thoughts when I say these situations, okay? There's only 4 of them. A parent leaves their child at the center with a temperature of 101 degrees more than one time. Automatic thought, write it down. A parent talks on their cell phone every time they drop the child off and when they pick them up. A child shows up to daycare every day hungry. You become aware a child has a TV in their bedroom and they're 4 years old. Automatic thought, jot it down. And we're going to talk some more about what we want to do with those automatic thoughts when our goal is, and my understanding of your goal and my goal for you is to help you align better even with those parents that create a challenge for you, meaning these parents that we're talking about. The automatic thoughts that we had really actually are going to have to include, they just do, our first thoughts do include our story. The stuff that we add in, the extra, the judgment, the reaction, our experiences in the past, what we think somebody's behavior means about us. Has anybody ever walked down the hall where you work and somebody looked kind of grumpy and you immediately assumed they were mad at you? You didn't say anything to them for 3 days, but you were sure that they were mad at you because they had a grumpy look on their face. That's the story, right? That's the kind of thing that we tell ourselves. Those are our automatic thoughts. So when we think about these stories or these automatic thoughts, depending on how we respond to them, how does that impact our aligning with parents? Well, this is what happens, right? When we tell a story to ourselves about why a parent is doing something with an automatic thought that carries a fair amount of judgment, obviously it's going to certainly crush any kind of alignment or opportunity we have to align with a parent. Has anybody ever done any kind of reading or seen Byron Katie speak? Anybody even heard of Byron Katie? Nancy, thank you. So Byron Katie actually came to the whole idea of some combination of Buddhism and cognitive behavioral therapy on her own when she woke up on the floor of a treatment center and said, the only reason I suffer is because I believe my thoughts. She decided from that moment on that any thought that she had was something she had a choice about. And she really looked at her thoughts more closely and said, I can actually find evidence to teach myself or believe or train myself to believe just about anything. So don't I have some choice about whether the thought that I believe is one that's going to help me or get in my way? So I want us to sort of keep thinking about that perspective as we think our goal is to align with all parents, to find a way to join with all of them. Now, right now, notice your automatic thought. All of them? Even Susie? No, whatever, right? So that makes sense. Automatic thoughts. We all have automatic thoughts. Let's just be clear about that. So I want you to look back at the stuff that you jotted down about the situation where you had some parent that you felt some conflict with, that you were concerned about, or your automatic thoughts to the situations that I told you, and see if you can find any actual factual information in your thoughts. There might be some, and oftentimes actually, particularly educators do have facts, but can you pick out the facts from what is maybe more like a judgment or an assumption? Anybody have any facts written down? You had one fact. In how many comments? Okay, 1 in 8. Good job. Anybody else? Anybody else able to sort of, you have 2 out of 4, not bad. 50%, pretty good. Again, our automatic thoughts aren't usually based that much on facts. that really we have a choice too, that when we recognize our automatic thoughts is to say, what do I do with these? If we have an automatic thought, we have a couple choices. One is we can treat it like a cinder. Here's the beginning of the fuel. Have you ever done that? Oh, that's so irritating. Oh, now I'm really mad. Oh, remember that time 12 years ago and that also happened that time? More and more and more, right? You just can throw the logs on and it's a big flame in your head and there you are. You fed it. You fed the fire. Or we can say, that's an automatic thought that I am at risk of having in this situation. And I need to notice that as a red flag. Nobody should ever be mad about your automatic thoughts because you know what? They're automatic. They come up right away. We actually can't stop them. We can't stop that automatic thought. It's kind of like the child who you're really trying to change their behavior, but you can't necessarily stop them from having the behavior in the first place. You can oftentimes help them reduce the behavior over time, right? So you can't actually stop an automatic thought, but you can use an automatic thought more effectively to help you move into a different thought. You can actually choose a reframe. That's what I'm going to suggest to you as you're thinking about those parents that are going to really create a challenge for you. So the other thing that we have to do with our thoughts for parents that are challenging are to think, they're going to challenge me every day. There's not going to be a day that goes by that they're not going to create the same challenge that I'm having today. Oftentimes we say to ourselves, wow, that really stunk, but I did this and I did this and I did this, and so yeah, I'm just not even going to think about it, or tomorrow will be better. It's a little bit of a setup, right? Because then tomorrow when the same thing happens, you're like, what? How could that happen? So first we need to be prepared. We're going to be challenged by those people who challenge us. And we have some choices about how deep we go into the challenge. So one of the ways that we know we're actually more in our stories than actually the facts or something that's helpful that might align us with a parent more is to notice the words we're using. You can think about this too with your partner, right? If your partner comes to you and says, you always, are you listening to anything after that? That right then, the conversation is done, right? You're right into your, no, but you never, right? That's the response. So if actually we're trying to get someone's attention, we've learned very clearly that if you start a sentence with you, we're actually probably about 75% in the hole already, but then you add on must, should, always, never, it's done. You've gotten nothing across at that point. You've created defensiveness. So even in our heads, and right now we're still working in your head, we will get towards what to do actually with the parent out loud, but even in your head, when you're hearing those words, always, never, should, must, shouldn't, that's when you can recognize, I'm in my story now. I'm in my automatic thoughts, and I shouldn't be there. No. Again, you want to be really nice to yourself in those moments. I really am recommending, I'm prescribing for you that when you hear those words, when you see the automatic thought, that your first thought is to be compassionate. We all have these thoughts, and they can get in our way if we feed them. We have a choice. So what I'm suggesting is that we can actually choose what we believe. We can try to a reframe that brings us more in line with parents. And I think it's actually generally helpful for you to evoke your own reframes within your own soul, mind, brain, whatever, what you want to believe about parents. What is going to be the belief that you would walk around with every day and wake up in the morning and really create an intention to believe if your goal was to stay aligned even with the most challenging parents? My guess is that you even have some of these that you've done with children, right? There's children who you could look at from one viewpoint that would make it very hard to be with them all day, or you could choose to find some other way to look at them, to think about them, to imagine why they can be frustrating for you that's actually much more compassionate, right? I mean, I assume that many of you have had to do that work where you stop and say, how do I understand, how do I observe this behavior from a compassionate, empathic place? So I'm suggesting that even those parents that are stressful and frustrating to you, also, it will feel better in your own experience to have a reframe. But here's a couple reframes that I try. What about these thoughts to believe about parents all the time? Parents are always doing always doing the very best they can at any given moment. Even the parent who never stops talking on their cell phone. Even the parent that ignores your policies and runs out of the room before you can actually respond to them about anything, is defensive, that they actually are probably always doing their very best at any given moment. And the other one being, they actually always want to be good parents. Even those parents that upset us, that we feel like maybe aren't even treating their children well, I can guarantee, I feel very confident actually, that they still want to be good parents. In some ways it's the same perspective. I don't know how many of you are managers, but one of the best perspectives you can have for an employee is to assume they always want to do a good job. And so if we can appeal to that part of them that wants to do a good job parenting, as opposed to reacting to that part of them that frustrates us, we're more likely to be aligned. We're more likely to work with them than against them. So I think first and foremost, as we're trying to think about how to feel less stressed by these parents, it really is, what's your reframe? What's that reframe that you would believe? I'm not saying you're going to walk in the door and as soon as that parent comes in and drops off their kid with 102 temperature this time and runs out the door and you don't have a chance to grab them and they don't answer their phone for the rest of the day, that you're not going to have some automatic thoughts. But if there's a way for you to evoke out of your own soul something that you can, that keeps you more empathic along the way, even when those challenges are coming up, these are just a couple suggestions I'm making. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about what you might do, how you might interact with parents when you're thinking about how do I stay in alignment. One is I'm going to suggest what it means to take a therapeutic stance. I teach therapeutic parenting all the time. I teach it, for a long time I taught it to foster parents specifically who are working with attachment injured children who really struggled to stay connected to those kids and really were, they came into my office for an hour or two a week, but then they went and closed the door and hung out with some pretty challenging children. So my goal was always to teach them how to be therapeutic parents, knowing that really it's the other 22 hours a day that they're with those kids, that those kids are really getting what they need. I also teach therapeutic parenting all the time now, even with biological parents, because I absolutely believe that most parents are going to be more therapeutic with their children than I'm ever going to be able to be in the office for an hour, if I can teach them what it means to take a therapeutic stance. There's a couple of real basic pieces to a therapeutic stance that I think could be helpful to anyone who's really trying to look at a situation and stay regulated, stay sort of emotionally balanced in it. So if I'm suggesting to you that you have to first work with your thoughts, I also want to give you a way to perceive the interaction with a parent who's challenging that might help you stay a little bit more regulated. So there's a couple pieces of the therapeutic stance that I think is super helpful in this situation. One is that you take an emotional step back. Sort of that's what, I don't know how many of you have been in therapy, I'm not going to make you raise your hand about that, but a good therapist is not overly emotionally involved in the situation. If you went to therapy and every time you told your therapist something that was upsetting to you, they started to cry, you would be worried about that. You would not feel that comfortable or safe. Or if when they seemed upset about something from the outside, they bit your head off and said, you think you've got problems, right? That really wouldn't keep a very safe space. So my suggestion, one, is that as you're working with parents who might challenge you is, can you take an emotional step back? Can you sort of take your emotional experience and put it aside for a little while? This is really truly what therapists are trained to do. They're trained to recognize their own internal experience and then say, okay, for now, for this hour, I'm going to put that aside right now, and I'm going to stay in the room with this person. So one suggestion I have is, can you put particularly as you're getting ready to interface with those parents who can really trigger you, can you take your emotional experience and take a step back? The next is not to expect mutuality. Again, in a therapy relationship, that's not to say there's a hierarchy. It's more to say that you're not expecting the same back from them that you're going to give. And again, I'm not saying this is true for every single parent that you work with, but the parents that are really you're at risk, that you're at risk for them to get under your skin, that it's hard to stay connected to them, if you stop expecting it to be a mutual experience, if you can really let yourself be the one that has a little bit more to offer in the relationship, isn't that going to help you feel more patient, more compassionate? Don't take it personally. This, I think, is probably the single most important piece of what it means to be a good therapist that I would impart to you. It is not personal. They're not doing this to you. It's really true that it's very likely that anything that they're doing that feels stressful to you, that maybe feels like they're not doing a great job with their children, they're not taking good care, is so much about them. And it's about their own struggle and their own frustration and their own challenges in their life. When we get caught in that story about, they don't value me, they're talking on their phone because they don't value what I have to say. That's pretty personal. My guess is it doesn't have a lot to do with you. My guess is actually it probably has a lot more to do with them and how they feel inside themselves about what it means to be in relationship to just about anyone, or particularly you, who's so close to their family by caring for their children. That's about them. So is it possible, could you imagine always choosing not to take it personally? Even with the most challenging parents could make it personal, right? They can say, I mean, has anybody ever had a parent say, sort of try to attack you personally when they're upset about something? Absolutely, it happens. That doesn't mean it's personal. That actually still doesn't even mean it's about you. So this is an essential piece of what it means to be therapeutic in your interaction, by noticing this isn't about me. And that any intervention you have with a parent is intentional. That your interaction with those parents who you are most likely to be triggered, and that it might be hard to stay aligned with them, that you are very intentional about what you say and how you interact with them. I do this with parents all the time. They say, you know, I'm not ever supposed to tell my kid how they make me feel when they're in a therapeutic interaction with the kid. This is a child who's struggling in some way or another, depressed, anxious, experiencing an eating disorder, maybe has an attachment injury, and I'm trying to train them how to be a therapeutic parent. I say, no, that's not true. Of course, at some point, you might share with them how you're feeling, but you would do that with intention. You wouldn't do that as a reaction. It would be, I think it might be helpful in this situation to let this child, or in your situation, parent, know what's happening here, or there's something I need to say or convey to them, but I'm going to be super intentional about that. That's my first suggestion to you. After you've done that inside job, and you've worked on those thoughts, and you're really trying to choose a reframe that helps you stay aligned, and then you start thinking about, how do I want to approach those parents that create a challenge for me? Now we're going to start talking about, how do you then approach a parent who actually is creating a struggle for you or some challenges for you. And first and foremost is we're really going to talk about our language. This is a big term, nonviolent communication. So I don't really mean to imply that anybody in this room is coming across with a violent communication to parents that they're challenged by. It's just a term. It's what this particular kind of communication is called. And I think that you'll find that all of these things I'm going to suggest are interwoven. None of them are so separate from each other. But again, the idea of nonviolent communication is that it has a radical component of compassion to it. There's 4 steps. One is what we've already talked about. Can you observe the situation factually? Be very specific and without judgment. And we're going to take some examples about this, so you don't have to absorb this all at once. But the first part is really just the facts. One of the things that parents really actually report is stressful for them about working with children, with teachers, is hearing the teacher's judgment, witnessing their judgment, not actually getting the facts. I don't know, how many of you are also parents as well? So most of you. Have any of you ever had that experience where a teacher has come at you and you felt like, I'm not sure what's true here? Because they're so laden with judgment and reactivity and like emotional feedback that the information they're trying to provide for me is not factual. Has anybody ever had that experience as a parent? Karen has. Karen's like, yes, indeed. I certainly have myself, too, as a parent. Had a teacher who probably actually had something really important to tell me about my child that I couldn't hear because there wasn't I didn't get enough of the facts. Recognizing that, of course, we're going to have feelings, but in nonviolent communication, we take complete and 100% responsibility for our feelings. Now, nonviolent communication style is something that people use oftentimes in relationships when they're starting to struggle or they're finding their communication is really broken down. The people who wrote the whole theory of nonviolent communication says that we could actually stop wars if people were willing to use nonviolent communication. So it really has a whole plethora of applications for it. But one of the most important pieces of this is that we take responsibility, that any feeling we have, we own. It's ours. That person did not make me have this feeling. You cannot make me feel, when you did this, you made me feel. Not nonviolent communication. Right there. Again, when we're talking about what works for communication, what doesn't work is you always, you never. It also doesn't work, you made me feel. When you did this, you made me feel something. It's our feelings are our choice. So we're staying aware of them. We're not necessarily communicating them. And we're recognizing this, that everyone has needs. Every person that we're communicating with has needs, and that needs are universal. So we might have a need around a communication about a child, but we also recognize that parents have needs. And a number of these needs are simultaneous, universal, the same. Often towards a common goal. We'll talk more about that. And that then we make a request that's doable, immediate. It can be either for clarity, for feedback, or for a specific action. So when we're thinking about the situations that we talked about, and I would highly recommend that you look at your challenging situation with the parent that you wrote down, and imagine how you might communicate from this style. Not avoid communicating, 80% conflict avoidant, or communicating in a way that people don't hear, you always, you never, but really from this perspective. So we imagine the parent who drops off their child with a temperature of 101 more than once. A more potentially effective way to communicate with them would be to say, last week, Johnny came to school with a temperature of 101 twice, on Monday and Wednesday. I feel concerned about that because I know we both really want Johnny to get the most out of his education here. And I'm asking for you to consider finding some sort of alternative daycare place for him to be when he's sick. Can I help you with that in any way? The likelihood that a parent might respond to that or at least be able to stay connected to you enough, then if you say, our policy says children should never come to school with a temperature over 101 and Johnny always comes to school that way. What are you going to do about that? Not that you guys would say anything like that quite, but we might rely on the policy. We might communicate with a lot of energy about that feels a little bit negative. We might exaggerate a little bit with always or many times, even saying something like many times as opposed to twice last week. That's kind of factual information, makes it much harder for parents to ignore what you're saying and to stay connected. So we've figured out how do we do the inside job, how do we deal with the potential judgments that we have. We come up with a reframe that's going to keep us more aligned with our parents. We're starting to think about how might we interact with them even from sort of a more therapeutic, a little bit more stepped back, to not expecting mutuality from them, not taking what they're saying personally, and then really being super thoughtful about how we approach them if something has come up. That doesn't mean it's all solved, right? So we could do this, and we still may not get very far with some parents. Some parents who are having their challenges may not immediately say, you're absolutely right. Could you sit down with me and figure out what that other daycare option is? I'm very sorry. Not always going to happen when you communicate, even as effectively as you possibly can. And oftentimes what then you witness is two possibilities. Either you go into conflict, or you just bump into what's considered resistance. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about possible ways to approach either one of those. Starting with conflict. There are some really specific techniques about how to do conflict resolution in a way that mostly people feel actually pretty good about at the end. That's very different than starting an argument. Unfortunately, a lot of us have had the experience that when there's conflict, that means that people's emotions get kind of out of control. And that's often why we are conflict avoidant, because our experience of conflict has been so negative in the past and not very much resolution. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you have conflict resolution. There's two main components. The two essential components for conflict resolution. One is personal safety and respect. That if you're going to actually go into a situation and plan to actually resolve the conflict, you have to start with safety. You have to start with safety for you as well as safety for the parent or whoever it is you're talking to. And the second is to recognize, as we were talking about in the nonviolent communication, that there's almost always the capacity to find a shared goal. Often what happens when we go into a conflict resolution situation, we think we either have to compromise or somebody has to lose. Somebody has to lose out on what it is they really want. And I'm suggesting to you, and the conflict resolution folks say, that just about every situation you can find something that both people want. So let's talk a little bit about personal safety. And again, in a conflict resolution situation, this is where you might start to think in a little bit more mutual terms. So in a general way, you don't expect parents to be exactly mutual with you, but if you're going into truly what you consider conflict, you definitely want to have as much safety and respect for you as you model for them. So what do parents need? Parents need to feel heard. Parents feel much more, what my experience of working with parents and their reports is that if they at least felt heard, that's going to make a big difference in their ability to sort of come closer to that which is you're looking for from them. So in here lies an important issue. A lot of times you guys don't have a lot of time, right? It's not always that you have, an hour. I have this lovely capacity then to set up an appointment with a parent who feels like they need to be heard and listen to them for an entire hour. You don't have that kind of luxury. So figuring out how to make sure that when you're going to go into a conflict resolution situation, you have the opportunity for a parent to have the space to be heard about what their concerns are. Let's talk about what does it mean to feel heard. If you're thinking about something else or waiting for your turn to talk, people know that, right? If you're not actually listening to what they have to say and taking it in and absorbing that in an authentic way, it's very hard for people to feel heard. So we go to our active listening skills, which I know you guys all have. They also feel the need to have empathy for how hard parenting is. As parents, I know you've all felt judged at some point. Parents are so easily judged in our society. We're always like, well, I wouldn't do it like that, right? At the soccer game or in the grocery store or something like that. We often have judgments of each other as parents and have felt judged as parents. I certainly have. So they need to have empathy for how hard parenting is. This is how they're going to feel safe. They're going to feel heard, and they're going to feel like you have some empathy. And to not feel judged. Is it possible for you to go into a conflict conversation, and even if their values might be very different than yours, is it possible to withhold your judgment and to hear the facts and not our stories? They really need to know the facts of the situation. What do you need? This is my impression. You need to feel competent. You need to feel like your expertise and your professionalism is valued. You need to feel valued. And you need to have the support from your colleagues and your supervisors. So when I imagine how you create personal safety as you go into potentially a conflictual situation with a parent, we need to have our good listening skills on. We need to give them an opportunity to talk. We don't want to bulldoze them. We want to have empathy for them. And we want to feel like we have the support of our team, that somebody has our back, that we've been valued. And it might not be the parent that we're going to feel valued by, right? We need to feel valued by somebody close to us, and we need to have some confidence in our own competence. It's going to make it much easier for us to feel safe in this situation. I'm going to suggest to you, if you take one thing home tonight, if the rest of the time you've been sleeping with your eyes open, you take this one thing home, is the idea that finding shared goals with parents is the single most aligning thing you could possibly do with a parent. to stay connected, to recognize that there's almost always a shared goal. Both parents and you want to feel valued and competent. We go back to our original reframe, which is that parents are always doing the best they can, and they want to be good parents. So they want to feel like no matter what they're doing, even if you're having a challenge with them, that you think they're valuable and competent. Well, so do you. You want to feel that as well. So there's a shared goal right there, that everybody's trying to do the very best for the children. That's another shared goal. So when we go into a conflictual situation, even if we had, with a parent, even if we had just both of those shared goals, we can absolutely come up with some more aligned perspective that our goal in this conversation is to both feel like our expertise is valued and that we're doing the very best for the children. Now, based on the specific situation, you're going to want to find a shared goal for the situation. So there's steps for conflict resolution. First is to identify the problem and then create the shared goal. So let's look at our situations before. A parent leaves their child with a temperature of 101 more than once. So the problem is what? What's the problem? What's the problem in that situation? I'm going to ask. The child's sick, and what's the problem with that? That they came to school with, they're sick. They can't learn. Okay, so there's the issue of contagion for other children, but most importantly in this situation, a child can't learn with 101 temperature. So that's the problem. What's the shared goal? If you are talking about the conflict of what it means to have a parent go against the policy and leave a child there, what's the when you're talking about that, what's the shared goal? What do you want as much as the parent wants in that situation? That the child is safe. There was a couple other thoughts. That they're getting the most out of their educational experience, right? That they're getting the most out of their day, that they can do their best. So if we went into that conversation with the parent saying, both of us want the same thing. We want Johnny to get the most out of his day here. It's a really different conversation than to say, you're going against our policy, or you're going to make other children sick, or you really need to do something about this. If we really say, wow, we have a problem. You don't appear to have somewhere else for Johnny to go when he's not feeling well, and you need to work. And we know that children actually don't learn that well when they're sick. It's actually hard for them to enjoy their experience. It can actually be quite taxing for them and can make them less well even. And we both want Johnny to get the best experience he can get here today. Now, let's start to talk about how to solve this problem. Your problem is joined, and more importantly, your goal is shared. And then you can start brainstorming solutions. So there's lots of steps to conflict resolution, and I'll go over them, but I just sort of want to go through this idea again of finding shared goals, because I think it's so important. So the parent who talks on their cell phone at pickup and drop off, what's the problem? Somebody, what do you think, what's the problem with it? They lack of attention to the child, that's possible. What else? What else creates a problem with that? They're not connecting with other people. And how can you communicate about their day, right? There's no way to hear maybe any kind of changes that have happened overnight, or communicate to them something, even something positive that's maybe happened during the day. You don't have that opportunity. So there's the problem. There's no way to communicate with this parent when you see them. We can add in some potential what feels maybe judgmental. They're not attending to the child. Is it true in that moment they're not attending to the child? Yes. Is it not true that they never attend to the child? We don't really know, right? We don't know if they talk it, but that can be the story we create in our heads. This is a parent who stays on their cell phone 24/7. So being super careful about that, we're saying at the very least, the factual information is before and after school, we can't communicate with this parent. It's not possible. What's the shared goal? Communication, right? Most parents are going to want to, if you brought it to them like that, we have a problem. It seems to me that you're often busy with your phone when you're doing drop-off and pickup, and that creates a problem for us to communicate with you. And I know you want also to be able to hear how Johnny's day went today. So I want us to figure out how we're going to solve this problem together. A child always shows up to school hungry. clearly the problem is that you're concerned that they're not getting enough to eat and that nutrition really impacts learning. Shared goal, once again, parent wants what's best for the child as well, easily. Comes to an issue like a child, you realize a child has a TV in their room. Gets a little tricky, right? Because now we're starting to talk about the experience outside of the classroom that we very well may just have judgment about. So we're going to have to work super hard to be clear about what our judgments are. The risk, obviously, with a child who has a TV in the room is a couple things. One is that they're overly involved with media, and maybe they're bringing a lot of that media experience into the classroom, which is kind of different than the fact that they have a TV in their room, right? So that's not really the problem, the TV in the room. What may be the problem is that it's affecting their sleep. What we do know is that there's a lot of impact on sleep when there's screens involved in any kind of sleep. Even when parents say, my kid needs to watch a screen to be able to fall asleep, the research shows that that really has a huge impact on their sleep quality. So the real problem is that we think it's impacting their sleep, and that we know they need adequate sleep to learn. Again, my guess is the shared goal in this situation is probably everybody wants this kid to get a good night's sleep. I can guarantee you that parent wants that child to sleep. So what that might be really becomes the conflict resolution is really saying, how can I help you find other ways to help your child get a good night's sleep than sleeping with a TV in his room? Make sense? We can almost always find the shared goal. So again, when we're going through the conflict resolution, we're going to identify the problem and the shared goal, then we can brainstorm solutions, and we're going to agree on a solution in a conflict situation. We're going to come up with something together, and we're going to try for a win-win. Parent says, I have to talk on my cell phone because that's where my business is, and I have to always be available on my cell phone. My cell phone has to always be on. So again, if we say to a parent, your cell phone has to stay in the car when you come drop off and pick up, that's our policy. Our policy is no cell phones in the school. Then we're probably going to create more conflict, as opposed to how do we help you get the communication that I think is really essential and not interrupt your business that you feel like you need to. So we're trying for the win-win, not the compromise. And then we always check back. You can't just leave it. Here's the solution. Let's give this a try. We have to check back. I can tell you that from my own experience, the idea of always going for the shared goal is really helpful. I recently had this experience with my own teenager who has a pathological procrastination problem. It's gotten only worse as he's gotten older, and he's going to graduate in about 5 weeks, God willing. So one night, he had clearly not finished an assignment that was well overdue. He's very charming, so he's very good at getting those extensions that he needs or wants. And so he came home to me that evening and was like, I'm going to go rock climbing. I was doing my very best therapeutic parenting stance. I was like, you're going to go rock climbing. Okay. First I went upstairs, talked to my husband for a minute, pulled my hair out, and said, okay, so I'm understanding that you're not done with that paper that was due 4 days ago, and you think it's a good idea to go rock climbing. Yeah, I think it's going to be fine, and I still have an extension on that, and I've done a lot of work on that, and, you know, all what procrastinators say. And so I said, okay, you are 18 years old, and you have your own rock climbing membership, but you can't take my car because I'm not comfortable with you driving to rock climbing when you really should be doing your paper. He got very upset, kept coming back in and out of the room, yelling and screaming, manipulating me, emotional, all over the place. I was really good that night, and I stayed really calm the whole time. And I kept thinking, so what's the shared goal here? We must have a shared goal. Finally, I just said, I want you to be caught up in your work, which I actually know he also wants to. Now, he wanted to go rock climbing as well, but he does want to be caught up in his work. It completely stopped him in his tracks and said, I want to be caught up in my work too. It doesn't make any sense for me to go rock climbing. It's like, okay, if you think so, honey, whatever you say. It was a beautiful moment. But I've also noticed that just in a few other situations where when you really work at finding the shared goal, that it actually diffuses a lot of situations. When we stop talking about how somebody's doing it differently than you want them to, but you're really talking about what do we both want in this situation, significantly helps. The last element of how to sort of support parents or get your point across or work towards something that's going to help you have a more effective relationship that I want to talk about is this technique called motivational interviewing. Again, it's a very involved technique. It's not something you just sort of throw out there and do. But there's a couple tenets to it, sort of like the idea of shared goals and conflict resolution, that I think is helpful in your situation. So this is a technique that's really used for when there's resistance to what's really undeniable, something that has to happen, like children actually need sleep and nutrition to learn. Undeniable. And there are reasons that sometimes that's very challenging for parents to do. So this can only be used when we have a clear, undeniable target. This is where, again, we take all of the stuff we've just been talking about and say, if we're talking about judgments, if we're not actually talking about facts or indisputably clear information, if we're giving someone our judgment, it doesn't work. It's not helpful. So, like when people are trying to look at communication with couples, we all have a lot of judgment about that. We just do. It's our automatic thoughts. It's okay. Some people feel like if you're not talking to your partner on a regular basis, you're not close. That's a judgment. Actually, there's been a lot of research that shows that actually isn't an indication of closeness or distance. That actually some couples are actually quite close and connected and talk very little. There are some really clear things. If you criticize your partner, that actually is an indication that you might get divorced. It's true, this is research-based, that if you're critical or demeaning, or there's two other potential things, attacking, there's one other thing, or stonewalling, there's 4 really clear targets that if that's part of your what expresses your communication, you're at risk of getting divorced. Research-based. It's actually not research-based that if you don't talk to each other, you're going to get divorced. So you can't actually tell all couples they have to talk to each other on a regular basis. That's a judgment. So when we're thinking about kids, we do this all the time. We have this really clear opinion. Like even the idea that Head Start has that the parents are the first and most important teacher. Great idea. Super supportive. It's super supportive to those parents who actually want to be valued as a teacher. But it's not research-based. It really doesn't show that the only way kids learn is if their parents try to teach them. So is it possible for kids to learn more if everybody in their world is trying to teach them? Of course it is. But it's not necessarily true that the children who don't have parents who try to teach them something every day don't learn. That's not the case. There's many, many, many of us in this room whose parents never took any responsibility for your learning. And you're all pretty smart. So we have to be super careful that whatever we're saying to a parent that we're really trying to move them towards is something that really truly is kind of evidence-based. So here are your strategic responses to resistance. First, that you're really emphasizing personal choice. This is your deal. I know it's actually quite hard to get children to eat in the morning, and you're going to have to decide how you're going to manage that, because we do know that she actually does better when she's got something in her stomach before she gets here. She's in a better mood, she's more engaged in the learning, and we know that it's really hard probably to get her to eat. And you're going to, this is really your choice. You could try to do something about this or not. We're going to emphasize personal choice. As they're saying, but it's impossible for me to get them to eat, or my child actually doesn't like food in the morning, we say back, yeah, your child really doesn't enjoy eating in the morning. It's very hard to get her to eat. She would prefer not to. And I wonder if it's possible that maybe if we tried to attack it from some other direction, maybe she would eat, because we all know that actually people do better when they eat before they try to learn. You side with the negative. It helps the person explore their side. Yeah, I'm not sure why you would bother trying to help her eat in the morning. What a pain in the neck that is. Think about all the money you save, but then she doesn't eat breakfast. I'm being a little facetious, but really overemphasizing that side, which maybe isn't exactly what you're going after, so that person has to explore. And again, this works it actually works quite well when you say, I'm not sure why I can totally understand all the reasons why you would do it this way. It gives that person license to start saying, well, wait a minute, what about that other side? You're not jamming it down my throat, so now I want to think about it. And you really are trying to develop a discrepancy between what you know is this person's value and how they're behaving. I know you want to be the very best parent you can be, and it's hard to get your child to eat in the morning. And in there lies the conflict, isn't it? Because I know you really want her to get the most she can out of school, and yet it's hard to get her to eat in the morning. So let's think about what are target behaviors that I think you can rely on. First of all, they have to be indisputable. They have to be in line with your shared goals. They have to be fact-based, and they have to not have stories or judgments or opinions assigned to them. So here's some indisputable facts about kids, right? These are the things that I think, and I'm sure you have more, are worth us going to the mat with parents in all of these thoughtful ways that we've been talking about all evening, such as our brains need balanced nutrition and sleep to learn. Really indisputable, right? It might be hard for a parent. You can have empathy about it. You can try not to be judgmental about why that's challenging, but it's indisputable. These things are necessary. Shame and peds learning. I know this is one of the most challenging things that you work with parents who are not very kind to their children. The goal then, when we're trying to address that with a parent, isn't to be critical of them. There's probably lots of reasons why they use shame. Some parents, I actually have a mental health person say to me the other day, said, I don't agree with that. I actually think shame can be a very useful way of teaching someone something. Well, that's interesting because the research shows different, but anyway, so it's one of those things that we have to be thoughtful as we're trying to help someone understand that actually calling someone names is not going to encourage them towards behavior change. We know this is factual. Children need attention from adults. Indisputable fact. One of the things that we're trying to work with parents about is how to pay attention, to give their children some attention. Adult emotion regulation impacts children's emotional regulation. Again, this is one of those things that you react to. You see a parent who's really up here, anxious, angry, reactive, and at the same time frustrated that their children are acting out or having these emotional breakdowns or tantruming or reacting strongly or being aggressive, and that we know we need to really help parents find a way to regulate their own emotions if they want their children's emotions to be regulated. So this is indisputable. It's different than saying, you've got to calm down, or that parent is so angry, or what's wrong with them. To really say, oh, the emotion regulation of the parent is having an impact on the child, that's an indisputable fact. Body language and tone communicate as much as words do. Again, research-based, we know this, and this is one of the things you're reacting to. A parent who looks the other way while the child is trying to say, Mommy, 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 look at my thing, look at what I did, look at the painting I made, and the parent looks distracted or uninterested. Yep. You could add a story to that, but this is the indisputable fact that children really are reading our body language and our tone as well as our words. It can't just be the words. And that children are not little adults. So anybody who knows anything about early development of understanding development, people really thought children were just little adults. And unfortunately, we also witness sometimes parents who treat children like they're little adults. They're supposed to take care of them, or they can hear about anything. They can play the M video games. They really do love those horror movies. That's what we do for fun. They talk about things that really children shouldn't hear about. We actually do know, research-based, that this is overwhelming for children to have to incorporate adult themes into their brains. Those are indisputable facts that I think are worth really trying to figure out. How do you communicate with a parent about them and motivate them towards change and thinking about how to do things differently, as long as we're staying empathic. So I'm just going to go through here a couple of take-home ideas from what I was saying. So first, we talked about using positive reframes when you're working with parents in any way, particularly those challenging parents. Really pay attention to the story that disrupts the fact-gathering and the connecting. Consider taking a therapeutic stance with some of those ideas I suggested to you before. Always consider the language of internally and externally. Obviously, what we say makes a difference, but what we think makes a difference too. And when people really are working in the nonviolent communication suggestion, know that if you're actually still thinking, I really hate you, but I'm going to say this in the nicest way, that the communication still is there. So we have to look at our internal language as much as our external language. Focusing on a shared goal helps align you with a parent. And understand resistance could be considered ambivalence. Ambivalence is a much easier thing to, again, align ourselves with than to feel like a parent is resistant. And then thinking about you, what's one small thing you can make a commitment to change? So when you're doing motivational interviewing and you finally hear somebody starting to think about change, that's the first question you ask. What's one small commitment you can think to make a commitment to change? So I'm asking you to do the same this evening as you're going out the door. What small thing might I try to do differently, even with those parents who are challenging to me? And thank you.